Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Wezi Mhango from Malawi. I work for Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Today, I'll be sharing with you some of the preliminary results from the collaborative work that we are implementing with the colleagues from North Carolina State University, DAS Malawi, and Horizon Farms. So the title of my presentation is Effects of Fungicides Application and Weed Management Methods on Performance of Peanut. This work is part of the research that we are working on developing efficient peanut agronomic packages in Malawi. The work is led by Dr. Brandenberg. So I'll not say much on the introduction because a lot has been said on peanuts, but maybe just to highlight that in Malawi, peanuts are widely grown by smallholder farmers, and the peanuts are grown for food mainly. They are also grown for cash, but also of importance is that peanuts as a legume, farmers, they also grow peanuts for soil fertility improvement because most of the soils are degraded in nitrogen. So farmers would want to benefit from the nitrogen fixed by these peanuts. So we have different varieties, but mainly we have the Spanish and the Virginia varieties. According to the reports in Malawi, the yield potential for the varieties that we have ranges from 2,000 to 2,500 kilograms per hectare. However, if you go to the smallholder farmers, there's quite a huge yield gap in terms of what is actually realized on smallholder farms versus the yield potential. So on average, the yield on smallholder farms is less than a ton. And there are a number of constraints to these yield gaps. Of course, unpredictable weather is one of them, but we also have issues related to agronomic practices. Like currently, there are a number of research activities looking at the plant density issues, whether farmers should plant at low density versus high density. And then you also have other constraints. And today I would like to share with you some of the results from our work where we are focusing on weeds and diseases as some of the major challenges to productivity. Just to indicate that in Malawi, most of the smallholder farmers, in terms of growing peanuts and most arable crops, these crops are grown on ridges, and it requires a lot of labor to prepare ridges. So when you are looking at some of the agronomic practices like weed management, it means at a certain point in time during the season, sometimes there are those challenges of competing needs for labor to make sure that all the crops are properly managed. For peanuts, the other challenge also relates to diseases. So there are quite a number of diseases, but for this talk, I'll focus mainly on leaf spot disease. Leaf spot disease, this one is a fungal disease, and from literature, it is reported that you can have yield losses up to 50% if no management interventions are put in place. So there are different management practices that are promoted for management of leaf spots. So some of the management practices relate to general field hygiene, so crop rotation, or making sure that the field is well weeded. But you can also use the fungicides to control leaf spots. Yeah, so the main objective of the trials that we are working on were to evaluate the effects of different weed management practices and also use of fungicides on the performance of peanuts at different densities. So this work is being done in Malawi. Malawi is in the Southern Africa. And specifically, this work is being done in central Malawi in Lilongwe. Lilongwe lies in the mid-altitude agroecological zone. So we get about 800 to 1,200 millimeters of annual rainfall. And in Malawi, we have only one rainfall season, so from November to around March or April. So some of the research questions that we were investigating were to look at whether the different weed management options would have an impact on the productivity of groundnut. But also, when you think about issues related to maybe planting density, the other question we are wondering is, where is it worth investing these weed management practices? Do you want to invest at low density or high density in order to have economic benefits? So in the weed management trial, we had 4 treatments. So the control, where we didn't do anything other than coming in at 8 weeks after planting with the banking. Then for the herbicides, we had three levels. The first one was the use of pre-emergency herbicide. The other one, post-emergency herbicide, and then a combination of the pre and the post-emergency herbicide. In all the 4 treatments, we came in at 8 weeks after planting just to do banking, more or less like earthing up the peanut plots. So for the pre-emergency herbicide, we used the harness. For the post-emergency herbicide, we used the bentazone, and then we had the combination. So in this table, I'm just presenting information in terms of the rates that were used and the estimated costs per hectare. During the season, we collect different sets of data. So we collect data on the soil characteristics, different variables on plant growth, weeds, disease scores, as well as the yield and yield components data. In this table, I would just like to share with you some of the results on terms of the cost of the weed management on one of the locations. So in this table, we have computed costs for the cost of the herbicide, but also the cost of hand weeding for the different plots, either at low or high density. So the main message from this table is that if I look at the total cost, as expected, the cost is lower at the lowest cost from the control plots. While in the treatments where we had herbicide, the costs for weed management were on the higher side, but not very high than the control. While on the other side, the other location for the trials, on this side, we noted that the site had a lot of problems in terms of weeds, the weed density. So the cost of weed management was much higher, almost double compared to the other location. So if you look at the cost of the herbicides versus the control plot, you find that the costs are even like 3 times higher compared to the control plots. But then, so that was information on the costs. This table, I'm presenting results on the yield from the different weed management options. So in this table, so the first 2 columns is the results on grain yield for CG9 variety at the 2 densities. The general message from the results, maybe 2 key messages. The first is that if you want to invest in terms of density, if you want to invest in high density, investing in high density without proper weed management is just a loss, because you are not getting anything in terms of yield, whether you plant at low density versus high density. And then the other message is that if you bring in the herbicides, you get more benefits from using the herbicides if you plant the peanuts at a higher density. However, there are no differences in terms of peanut yield between the different herbicides. So whether you do a pre-emergency herbicide only, a combination, or post-emergency, there are no differences in terms of yield. The other message also that we are getting is that in terms of response to weed management, there are differences between these 2 varieties. So Chitala seems to be very responsive to the weed management options. So the benefits in terms of yield gains with weed management and density, they are much higher in Chitala variety compared to CG9. So on the previous slide, it's just I think the trend is the same, so maybe I'll skip this one for now. On this slide, we are still working on the data to compute the results on the weed diversity, but the general overall outlook in terms of the effects of the herbicides on the weeds, what we find is that the pre-emergency herbicide was more effective in terms of controlling the weed density. Well, initially we thought that maybe a combination of the pre-emergency and the post-emergency would give better results. Now let me quickly jump to the fungicide trial. So in the fungicide trial, we had the 2 varieties, and both varieties were planted at a high density. And in there we had only 2 treatments, so with fungicide or no fungicide. And we used the Groundnut as a fungicide. This was applied at 40 days after planting. During the season, we collected data on disease severity using the APRES scale for scoring diseases. So from the disease scores, what we noted was that for between the 2 varieties, for Chitala, we saw that Chitala was more susceptible to leaf spot, and the severity, the rate of severity increased over time. The other thing that we also observed was that actually application of the fungicide reduced the incidence of leaf spot in both varieties and at both locations. So did that effect translate into improving productivity? In this figure, I'm presenting results on grain yield from the two locations for the two varieties. The general message that we are getting is that if you apply fungicide, actually you increase productivity by about 23% to about 70%. Between the varieties, we also observe that Chitala variety was more responsive to the fungicide compared to the other one. But in both varieties, application of fungicides is beneficial in terms of enhancing productivity. So what are some of the key conclusions, I think, from this work? The first conclusion is that with the proper weed management, we find that use of herbicides can help to reduce the yield gap in peanuts, and more benefits can be realized if the peanuts are planted at high density. The other conclusion is that based on the yield and the weed management costs, the use of pre-emergency herbicide was more effective in terms of managing the weeds and also enhancing productivity. However, I think we are still working on the data, maybe to look at maybe other costs associated with the different weed management options. Because in here, we just considered the labor hours and the cost of the herbicides. The other conclusion is that the use of fungicides in peanuts also can help to reduce the yield gap, because we saw that overall you can increase the yield of peanuts by an average of about 50%, but the response varies with the variety and the location. Yeah, so thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for an excellent presentation. We certainly appreciate that, and good to have you here today. There's a couple of questions, and we're going to forward those to the speaker and try to address those behind the scenes, but thanks for the questions and for the presentation.